Let's talk about 5 things I wish I knew about acrylics as a beginner. The differences between acrylic paint brands is gigantic. Sometimes I feel like they're practically a different material. For this painting, I used 4 different brands of acrylics. I was not a fan of these Sennelier abstract acrylic paints. They were really wimpy, felt very transparent. I was really disappointed by Golden Heavy Body Titanium White. Golden is a really wonderful acrylic brand, but their titanium white, it didn't have the opacity I was looking for. This painting had a lot of marker underneath that was really difficult to cover. I needed a white that was really opaque. This is Stuart Semple's White 2.0. It's pricey, but this was by far the most opaque white I got. It's runny. It's not the way traditional heavy body acrylic paints are. I did really like this titanium white I got at GUERRA Paint and Pigment. It's got a nice opacity to it, but it's not as runny as the Stuart Semple. You can especially see the slight nuances that are different in the whites in this black and white image. Here in the background, where there was a lot of gray marker underneath, I wanted the white to be very transparent. That way, the pattern in the background was a lot more visible. But in the clothing, I wanted nice opaque coverage. Every acrylic white has its own special talent depending on the types of effects you want. I would pick it by the brand. I always assumed that canvas was what you used to paint on. Never occurred to me that there was another option. For years and years, I only painted on canvas. And then when I started painting on watercolor paper and even printmaking paper, what a huge difference! I realized once I started painting on paper how much I love a smooth surface. This one is a canvas board. For me, that texture, it just really gets in the way of getting a more refined look to my brushwork. I know some people love canvas, but I just had no idea there was another option. This is a gesso board that Ampersand makes, and you can see it has a real width to it. You can see on the back how incredibly rigid this cradle is. This gesso board is super smooth, and look at this. It's very rigid. I actually really don't like working on stretched canvases because there's a little bit of a bounce. I discovered that I really like a rigid surface, or something like stretched watercolor paper is a much better fit for the way that I paint. I genuinely thought for the longest time that there was only one type of acrylic paint. It was heavy body paint that I was using. The way I was painting was so thick, and that's one of the things that bothered me when I was painting with acrylics. With these heavy body acrylics, it's really difficult to get a nice, smooth flow in your paint. And I realized that out of all the acrylic paints that are out there, I think heavy body is the one that I use the least. I had no idea that they made something called fluid acrylics. If you want flow, this is a really great type of acrylic paint. With the heavy body, I always felt like I was fighting it. For me, there's no resistance with the fluid acrylics, which is perfect for me. You can see that the fluid acrylics, they definitely have an inherent transparency to them. These are fluid acrylics that have been mixed with white. You can see how opaque they are. I always knew that you could add water to acrylic to make it a lot more like watercolor. Never really had a very nice flow to it. Now, fluid acrylics, this is the first time I felt like when I added water to the acrylics that it had a really nice flow that was almost comparable to the way a watercolor paint would flow. In this painting, you have passages up here where I've added a lot of water. You can see tons of fluid strokes, but then how cool is this that I can get nice, thick, opaque darks and little spots of opaque highlights. Another reason I really did not like acrylics is they dried so fast. I felt like I couldn't get things fixed before they dried out. How happy would I have been if I knew about golden open acrylics? These are acrylics that are specially formulated to extend the dry time. On top of that, I had never heard of slow dry medium. Both of these things could have really helped me when I was so frustrated with the dry time. This is a painting that I did with golden open acrylics. It was very easy to thin down, which for me was great because I love painting in very, very thin layers. But if you look at the yellow highlights, you can see that it does have a nice opacity that's possible once you've layered up a couple of layers. I was really surprised about these open acrylics. I was thinking, there's no way they could make it extend for long enough. But I found I worked on that painting for about 2 hours. It was still wet. I was really impressed that these really worked. I had no idea that interference paint was an acrylic paint type. Interference paints have this just beautiful pearlescent quality where you get different colors depending on the point of view that you're looking at the piece. You can see here there's this very brilliant purple that's happening. The easiest way to see the difference with interference paints is when you paint them on black paper. They're barely visible when you paint them on white paper, but look at this. What a beautiful, slight pearlescent quality. And there are two types of acrylics that Golden makes that I've never tried before, So Flat and also High Flow. Every one of these types of acrylic paints does something really well. When I was using the heavy body acrylics exclusively, I just was constantly fighting it. I was mad that it didn't flow enough. I was frustrated that the dry time was so fast, and all of these acrylic paint types pretty much fix all of those problems. I didn't realize how much research you had to do into all of the different materials that are available for acrylics. That really would have saved me a lot of grief. I wish I'd known about all these amazing acrylic mediums you can add to your paint to get so many different effects. These acrylic mediums are specially formulated for the open acrylics. When I started painting with acrylics, it was me, the paint, the brush, and water. I had no idea that there's this incredible universe of a million types of acrylic mediums, things that allow your paint to get a lot more transparent. And I so wish I'd known what glazing was, one of my favorite ways of painting. The concept behind a glaze is that it's a very thin, transparent amount of paint that you add over an opaque layer. Oh, that's another thing I didn't understand. I had no idea that there was such a thing as opaque paint and transparent paint. Everything I was painting was 100% opaque, which is probably why my paintings had no depth and were so flat. This is opaque paint. It's very thick, and this is typically done best with heavy body acrylic. But if you look at this upper corner, you can see there are multiple strokes, and they're all going in different directions. Those are places where there's been multiple layers of transparent paint, glazes that are going on top of each other. One of the reasons why glazing is so awesome is it creates instant depth. Once you have a layer of opaque paint and then you have a thin layer of glazing, there's just this beautiful glow that happens. I mean, how do you think Rembrandt made such incredibly luminous paintings? It was because he was a master of glazing to create that luminosity. I also really like glazing because you can slightly tweak a color without having to repaint it entirely. If I have an opaque color and I decide, oh, I don't like that red, maybe I want to make it a little bit darker. Instead of remixing a dark red, I can just do a very thin purple glaze on top of that. So the red stays, but then the purple glaze creates this beautiful tint. All the passages in here, it's multiple layers of glazes. Here's a spot where I painted a very opaque Naples yellow color, but then look at, I did a very thin glaze of this teal color. And if you look at it really closely, you really can see the Naples yellow underneath it, but that little bit of teal made that yellow a little bit more cool. Here's another spot where you can really see colors overlapping, but you can see the color underneath. I also think in general, a lot of people associate painting with being something that's quite thick. I certainly did. I had no idea you could do something like a glaze, much less get mediums to increase the flow. Of course, I use water to clean my brushes, but one of the reasons you want to try these mediums instead of just thinning your acrylic paint with water is that water, when you add it to acrylic paint, it basically breaks down the acrylic paint. The mediums will not do that. They will help you increase the flow of your acrylic paint, but it does not break it down the way that water does. These mediums are a way to increase the flow, but not lose the body. So when you add some of these mediums into your paint, it flows, but it also feels robust. And it looks very different on your page when you compare acrylic paint that's been watered down versus acrylic paint that has matte medium in it. Once you've seen that difference, you're not going to go back to just using water with your acrylics. There's a huge world of a million things you can add into your acrylics, like coarse pumice, glass beads. This acrylic has small flakes of mica in it. My knowledge of acrylic materials when I first started was about 0.0001% of what's actually out there. I know it's super overwhelming. You go to the art store and there's just a giant shelf of so many different types of mediums. My recommendation would be to start with a slow dry medium, sometimes that's called a retarder as well, and a matte medium. You can totally live with just those two mediums and you'll get plenty out of it, especially if you're just starting. Don't go to the store and get a giant haul of 50 mediums. That's just going to confuse you. It's important to really spend quality time with your mediums so you really get to know each other. I wish I'd thought to use acrylic with other media. I pretty much never use acrylic entirely by itself. This piece has a lot of colored pencil in it. There's also acrylic inks, watercolor. I am such a fan of using acrylic paints with other materials because each material does something different. Details are just so much easier for me when you do them with colored pencils.